Welcome to the Photoshop training channel. I have an awesome tutorial for you guys today, and actually this was a request by one of my viewers, Fernando Battle, who sent me a message on Facebook asking for this tutorial. As you might imagine, I get a request for tutorials almost every day, but this one stood out since it was an original idea and I had not seen a tutorial that used Photoshop exclusively to create this effect. So thanks to Fernando for the suggestion. If you have an idea for a tutorial, let me know. But keep in mind that I can't possibly do every tutorial that is suggested to me. But anyway, in this tutorial, I'll be showing you how to achieve the Ken Burns effect using only Photoshop CS6. The Ken Burns effect is a motion graphics technique which pans and zooms images to create motion in depth. The effect has evolved to include panning in 3D space, which is what we'll be doing in this tutorial. We're going to move the foreground, midground, and background independently of each other to create a sense of depth. This is called the parallax effect. In the past, Photoshop was used to create the individual images of the effect, and motion graphic applications like After Effects were used to create the animation. With Photoshop CS6, we can achieve this effect without the use of any other program. This is going to be a long tutorial, since I'll be starting from scratch, and I will need to create the different images that will make up each of the planes. But to save you some time, I've included the images already masked out so that you can skip ahead to the fun stuff and just do the 3D effects on your own. To download the files, just look for the link below. If you're not on my site now, go to photoshoptrainingchannel.com and look for this tutorial. Okay guys, let's get started. In this tutorial, we're going to be working with the image of this girl and this guy riding in a bike. And before we go any further, let's make sure that you're looking at the same thing that I'm looking at. So go into Window, Workspace, make sure 3D is checked, and click on Reset 3D so your panels are arranged in the 3D workspace. And we're first going to work in our Layers panel. The first thing you need to do is determine the number of planes. For example, what the foreground is, the midground, and the background. Each plane is going to have a different depth in the Z-axis, and it's going to create a sense of perspective. Having 3 or more layers will create the parallax effect, which works well to create a sense of perspective and depth. So let's determine what's going to be our foreground, our midground, and our background in this image. So the girl is closer to us, to the camera, than the guy, and obviously the background is behind both of them. So the girl's going to be our foreground, the guy is going to be our midground, and the sky along with the grass and the road is going to be our background. Now in your image, you might have more objects in here. You might have 5 or 6 or maybe even more, and you have to determine what those objects are. That way you can mask them out accordingly. So the first thing we need to do is create a layer that only contains the girl, and then do the same thing with the guy and the same thing with the background. So I'm going to show you how to mask out the girl first. So click on the original layer, press Ctrl J to duplicate, and select the quick selection tool. Start clicking and dragging anywhere along inside of the girl so you only select her. And by the way, I'm just clicking and dragging. I'm holding the left mouse button on my mouse. And by the way, I accidentally selected this guy, and that's okay. I can just hold Alt or Option on the Mac and subtract from that selection, like so. And I'm just going to continue selecting her arm, and I'm going to go a little quickly here because this is going to be somewhat of a long tutorial, and I don't want to bore you with something you already know, like selecting an image. So I'm just going to quickly select her as best as I can, and I'm going to hold Alt and subtract from the selection here in between her arm and her body, like so. Do the same thing on the other side, and I have a pretty decent selection here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into the quick mask mode and click on the icon here right below your foreground and background color. This is your quick mask mode. When you do that, everything that is not selected is going to have a red overlay on it, so the guy and the background will have this red overlay in this image. I'm going to click on the zoom tool, and I'm going to zoom in to some areas that need some work, like her arm here. You can paint with black, and actually let me select a soft brush. You can paint with black to subtract from that selection, and you can paint with white to add to the selection like so. I'm going to press X to go back into my background color and use the bracket keys to adjust the size of my brush, and I'm going to paint the areas that need some work, like here and here. And as I said before, I'm not going to spend too much time on here since you probably know how to do this already. So I'm going to oops, actually that should not be selected. And I'm going to select the cable here for the brakes on the bike. I'm going to press X to switch to make my my foreground color black. Actually, I needed it white. I had it right to begin with. And the better your selection is, the better it's going to work afterwards. So you might want to spend a little more time than I am on making the mask for your objects, for all your different objects. And actually, I need to add back to the selection, so I'm going to press X and select her arm, and this should be okay for now. Actually, I gotta add to the selection here on her shoulder, like so. And we gotta fix the selection on her hat actually, so let's do that. And now that I'm done, I'm going to zoom out and make sure that I have everything that I need selected, and it looks like I do. So then I'm going to click on the quick mask mode once again, and I'm going to add a layer mask by clicking on the layer mask icon. And as you can see, if I shut off the visibility to the original layer, I only have the girl selected. I can click on the layer mask and then click on mask edge. I'm going to change the view to black so we can see our selection better, and I'm going to smooth it out just a little bit to have smoother edges. I'm going to shift the edge slightly, maybe -1%, and I'm going to feather it again just a little bit, maybe like 0.5 pixels like so, to create a smoother selection. Then I'm going to press OK, and I see that there's an artifact here that I don't want, so I'm just going to erase that by painting with black. Okay, and that's gone. So now we have the girl on this layer. And what I'm going to do now is do the same thing with the guy. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing, so you don't really need to see. So I'm going to pause the video, and once I have them selected, I'm going to come right back. Okay guys, I'm back. As you can see, I've already gone ahead and added a layer mask to the boy layer, so I'm just going to name this layer boy. And this is actually looking pretty good. Now, I just noticed that we're missing some pixels here in the girl's hat, so I'm just going to click on that layer mask and I'm going to add those pixels back. And it's actually good to shut off the visibility on your original layer so you can see the background and you can see where there's some mistakes, if any. So I'm just going to do this a few more times, and it looks like everything's good so far. Okay, so now the next step is, if we're going to be moving these layers around in 3D, we need to create an arm for this guy, because when we move her around with the 3D camera, it's going to be obvious that he's missing an arm. So we need to create an arm for him. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on the girl layer, we're going to select the lasso tool, and I'm going to select her right arm, like so. Then I'm going to go into Edit, Copy Merge, and then press Ctrl V to paste. And I'm going to shut off her visibility, the visibility of the girl layer. And I'm going to move that arm with the Move tool and place it right above the handle, like so. Then I'm going to press Ctrl T on the keyboard, that's Command T on the Mac. I'm going to move the pivot point to the hand, and now I can rotate it from that point. I'm going to scale it down. I'm going to hold Shift to keep the arm constrained, and I'm going to try to match it as best as I can to where his arm would be. And I'm going to right click on that layer and click on Distort, so I can click on the corners here, on the corner handles, and get a better result, like so. And the hand might still be just a little too big, so I'm going to click on Scale and scale it down just a little bit. Use the arrow keys on the keyboard to move that around and press enter. And that's pretty good right there. I'm going to add a layer mask. I'm going to press B on my keyboard to get the brush tool. Press X on the keyboard to make my foreground color black. Use the bracket keys to change the size of my brush. And I'll just mask out things that don't belong. Looks like I have some transparent pixels here, so I'm just going to paint that white to bring those back like so. And when I'm done, I'm just going to right click on the layer mask and click apply layer mask. And I'm going to put that right above the boy layer. And I'm going to go into filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Since the boy is more blurry than the girl, and we want to match the same blurring, so something around 2.1, maybe even more. Actually 2.3, 2.1, something like that would work. Press OK, and then press Control E, Command E on the Mac, and click on Apply to apply the layer mask. So now we have a layer with just the boy and the girl. And now that we're here, I'm going to also apply this layer mask since we won't be needing those anymore. Now that we separated our foreground, our midground, we need to separate our background. Now, I'm going to duplicate this layer by pressing Ctrl J, and I'm going to call this layer background. And what we need to do is make sure that both the boy and the girl cannot be seen in this background, because if we move layers around in 3D space, you'll see the original girl or boy in the background. So what we need to do is use our Photoshop skills to create a new background from here. So we're going to be doing a lot of cloning, patching, smudging, a whole bunch of different techniques so we can create a new background out of this image. So in your particular image, it might not be as easy and you might be limited to a very small 3D movement. But we're going for a pretty dramatic effect here, so we are going to have to recreate our background. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to grab the lasso tool, and I'm just going to make a selection around this area, like so. And actually, you know what? I'll even include some of this part, some of that up there as well. Then I'm going to go into Select, Modify, Feather. Make sure the feather radius is 5 pixels. Press OK, and then press Ctrl J. Then press V on the keyboard. And by the way, that was Command J on the Mac. And press V on the keyboard to select your Move tool. And now you can move this around as well. And I'm going to hold Alt or Option on the Mac to keep making duplicates of that background, like so. And as you can see, these are all new layers from that background we've been duplicated. I'm just going to select them all and press Ctrl E. And I'm going to use the Clone Stamp tool. Hold Alt to select a source of reference. And just kind of get rid of those repeating texture, like so. And we'll leave that there for now. Now, there's a road back here, as you can see. So let's try to recreate the road. The road is going to be, and actually let me select the polygonal lasso tool, and just kind of give it a good guess of where that road is going to be. So maybe along here somewhere, maybe. Like so. And actually, if I put my original layer on top, I can probably even get a better estimate, maybe here. Like so. And then I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm just going to select the color of the road here, this off-white color, and then go into Select, Modify, Feather, press OK, and fill it with that color. And I'm sorry if this is taking a little too long, but we do have to create this background to get the effect that we're going for, and I'm going to go as fast as I can here. So now that we have that road, we can continue using the Clone tool and adding to that, like so. And by the way, I'm holding Alt or Option on the Mac to select a different point to clone from, like so. And you can just keep doing this until you get rid of the people here. And one trick I'm going to show you is to duplicate. We're going to need to create trees, these trees back here. And one way of doing that is by adding a new layer, selecting the brush tool, and selecting one of these brushes here, like one of these. And we're going to click on the eyedropper tool and select that green. Press B on the keyboard to bring back our brush. And we're just going to, actually, you know what, this brush is not working as well as I had hoped. So let's pick this other brush here. Let's see how this one is going to work. Okay, this is working much better. We need to create that tree line again. So we have that, and we can go into Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and press OK. And if we do this step 2 or 3 more times with the different colors found in the tree line, we can get a pretty close duplicate of how these trees look like in the background. Now I'm going to go ahead and pause the video one more time, and I'm going to continue deleting the girl and the boy from this image so we can have a clean background to work with. And by the way, I've been creating all these layers. Once I'm done, I'm going to select them all and press Ctrl E so they're all in one single layer. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pause that video one more time. Okay guys, I'm back. As you can see, I've gone ahead and deleted the boy and girl off the background, and it's okay if it doesn't match 100%. This effect is going to be a video, of course, and people don't really know what the image looked like originally, so you have some creative license to do some things to make things work. For example, there's 3 trees here that I don't think were in the original image, and that's okay. And I created these trees with the technique I showed you before I paused the video. And what I did here is just kept cloning that same area over and over again and created this road. And out of the green piece there, I created the entire row just by mixing and matching colors. And by the way, the same tree technique that I use here, I use to create some of this color here on the green to not have it completely green. But anyway, now that the hard stuff is out of the way, let's do something fun. Let's add some 3D movement to this image. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the girl, the boy, and the background layer. Click on the 3D panel. Make sure the 3D postcard selected, and click on Create. Okay, and our images have been turned into 3D postcards that are in 3D space. Now if I click and rotate the images, they're all 3D, but they're all in different 3D spaces, and that's not good. We need them to be in the same 3D space. I'm going to press Ctrl Z, that's Command Z on the Mac to undo, and I'm going to click on the Layers panel, and you can see the 3D layers here. We need to select them all and merge them into the same 3D space. So I'm going to select them all, and I'm going to press Ctrl E, and this is going to put them in 3D space. But some of the layers disappear because the way Photoshop arranges the layers is the layer on top will be the layer that's behind all the other layers in 3D space. So I'm just going to press Ctrl Z, and I'm going to go into Layers, Arrange, Reverse. And this is going to change the order of layers. So then when I press Ctrl E or Command E on the keyboard, this time the layers are arranged properly. It's really not that important. You can change that here in Photoshop in 3D by moving the images in the Z-axis, but it saves you some time, and I kind of wanted to show you that one trick. It was actually one of the tips of the day, if you remember. But anyway, so now we have all our 3D layers in one 3D space. I can double click on this 3D layer and you'll see them here: girl, boy, background, and our camera. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go edit and step backwards because I move the camera around a little bit, and I want everything to be in my default camera view. And by the way, I could have just double clicked on this and it would have brought everything back to the way it was. So now I gotta start moving these layers around in 3D space. And actually, you know what? I'm gonna have to move this again one more time. And you can click on the background layer, and you can click on the Z-axis blue arrow here to move it back or push it back in 3D space, like so. Or you can use the slider here and just push that back as far as you can. And you know, somewhere around 6,000 or so. is fine. And then you're going to move the boy back as well. And for him, you know what? Why don't we just do 2000? See how that works out. And I can click on the default camera. And this is what we have now. As you can see, we created some perspective and our layers are in 3D space. What we need to do now is make them larger so they fill the entire canvas. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to zoom out so I can see where the canvas ends on all sides. And I'm going to click on the background layer first. And I'm going to click on the scale tool. And I'm just going to scale this thing up. So it's still far away. It's only getting bigger. So it fills up the canvas. And I'm going to do the same thing for the boy. Okay. And I'm going to click on default camera just to make sure that I'm in the default view. And this is how our image is going to end. Now we need to create the motion in 3D space. So I'm going to click on create video timeline to create our video. And in our canvas here, and by the way, I'm going to zoom out more so I can see the entire image as I work with the timeline here. So we have this layer called girl, and what that layer called girl is actually the 3D layer. So I'm just going to double click on that and call it 3D layer. And then of course we have the original, and I'm going to move that to the bottom. And as you can see, any change I make here, it reflects on the timeline. We're not going to use the original image for now. One of the things you might want to do though is just turn it on and see what the difference is. And as you can see, we matched it pretty good in 3D space, so we don't really need this anymore. And I'm going to click on this little arrow here on the 3D layer. I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to find the camera position. And I'm going to create a keyframe. So Photoshop remembers the settings of the camera. And I want my composition to be 5 seconds long. And if I scroll up, I can actually move this to the left here, which will determine the length of my video. I can move this back too, actually. So my video is only 5 seconds long. Now I created this keyframe here, which remembers what the camera is looking at now. But I don't want that in the beginning. I want that at the end. So I'm going to move that keyframe all the way to the end. And it should snap right at 5 seconds. Then I can come into the beginning of the video and move my camera around. Maybe move it like this, for example. And if I come over and click play, you'll see the video that I just created. So Photoshop saw the settings I applied to my ending keyframe and to my beginning keyframe, and Photoshop went along and filled in everything in between, which was that turn there. So what I need to do now is come back in here and make more dramatic movements that will be more visually appealing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the drag 3D object tool, which is this one here. And by the way, I'm going to make all my changes here in this little square here in the bottom. So I'm only affecting the camera and not the actual 3D objects. So I'm just going to move that around just a little bit like so. And maybe zoom in to this guy here. Like so. Maybe rotate that. Okay. Let's see how that looks now. I'm going to press play once again. Okay, that's not looking too bad. What I'm going to do is, once I get here, right about here, I'm going to have the camera turn again and face the girl. Maybe that's not going to work as well as I wanted to. I need to make my background bigger, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it, but I can maybe move the camera a little bit like so. So I'm going to come back to the beginning, press play. And yeah, that's looking much better. Okay, I think you got the idea. So for your image, or if you're following along with this image, you can keep playing around and see the different animations you can create, but just remember that anytime you're in the timeline and you move the camera around, it's going to create a new keyframe, and it's going to follow whatever movement you created. So if you make one accidentally, just delete it. You can move the keyframes around if you want to. If this particular movement is what you want but it's too slow, just bring in the keyframes closer together. Maybe right here and right there, and press play. And that was a little bit faster, as you can see. And we can even go faster than that. That's a little too fast for my taste. I'm just going to leave it at where we had it originally, at 5 seconds. And by the way, I'm pressing Control-Alt-Z or Command-Option-C on the Mac to do multiple undos. Anyway, so that's it for the motion of the camera. As I said before, feel free to play around in your image, but now I gotta show you something that's equally important, which is rendering out this video. Now, if you come into the flyout menu and click on Render Video, you have different settings. So let's just work with what we got so far, which is the Adobe Media Encoder H.264 and 3D Quality Interactive. So I'm just going to click on Render. And this is real time, by the way. As you can see, this is rendering pretty fast. And we're going to get a video. Let me go ahead and open up that video. And I'm going to press play. And as you can see, this is the video. Now there's a few problems that you might have already seen, and it's going to keep looping right here. You're going to see some black there. I don't know if you saw that. And the edges are not as smooth as we would want them to be. You can still see a lot of black around the different objects. And we have to fix that, obviously, since it's not looking as good as it could look. So I'm going to close this video, and I'm going to go back into Photoshop. Now, when you do a render with Photoshop, you have to change the quality from interactive to draft or final. The problem is that these take some time if you don't apply the proper settings. I'm going to cancel this for now, and I'm going to select the rectangular marquee tool. I'm going to come into the girl's hat and make a selection like so, and I'm going to click on the render button. So this is going to start rendering out. And notice how long it's taking just to render this particular square. It's taking a while. Now imagine if you had to render the entire sequence. Right now we have it set to 30 frames per second, so there's 30 images in every second. So you could imagine how long it would take to render this entire sequence. And I'm going to go ahead and stop that render, by the way. And notice how the image is dark. The outline is gone, but the image is way darker than we want. Now if we go into Edit, Preferences in 3D, we can change the quality threshold to something much less. The problem with that is that when we do a render on that, when it stops, it's going to have a lot of noise on the image. Now the reason this happens is because in our environment we have our shadows turned on. So you have to turn off your shadows and then do a render, and notice how much quicker that was. Notice that right away that line went away. So you can now come back and render your video, and you can just do a ray trace draft. If you do a ray trace final, it's going to take a lot longer and the quality won't be much better. So you can now do a ray trace draft, click on render, and this is telling me that I already have a file with the same file name. I'm going to cancel that, and I'm just going to put a 2 next to that. I'm going to render it, and it's going to take a little longer than the previous video we rendered, but the quality is going to be much better. Okay, the video is done rendering. I went ahead and paused the recording, that way you didn't sit through the entire render. That took about 3 minutes total. So let me show you what the video looks like. And this is the video here, and as you can see, the edges are much cleaner. You don't see any of the dark edges that you did before. The only problem that I see here is this part of the girl, but that's not part of the rendering. That was the bad masking that I did to begin with. So That's what I was talking about earlier. It's better if you take your time masking out your images so you can avoid problems like this, but it's not a big deal. You can just go back and mask that out. And this is our final effect. One other thing, notice how I still made a mistake here in the arm a little bit, but it still looks like it's part of the image. And when you're watching it entirely without stopping it, you probably don't even notice that arm. You think it's his. So it's not a big deal. Another thing that I noticed is that back here in the background, this doesn't look good at all. So one thing that I could have done is maybe move the camera around in an angle where you don't see this part. Or I could have found an image of another road and photoshopped that in so it looked a little bit better. You can bring elements from other images if you like, but again, I don't want to make this tutorial longer than it had to be, so I settled with that. The real point of this tutorial is show you the Ken Burns effect that you can create in Photoshop, and you no longer need Illustrator. You can do it all in Photoshop. I'm going to put the files on my website alongside this video so you can just download them individually in case you don't want to waste your time cropping the images and doing all that crazy cloning to the background. That way you can get to the fun part right away and you can just follow along from there. Alright guys, well thank you for watching this tutorial, and don't forget to share this tutorial with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, Pinterest, or whatever you like to share your stuff. If you decide to follow this tutorial and do your own Ken Burns effect, don't forget to send me a link. You can either contact me on my website or just share it on my Facebook page. And don't forget to subscribe to my newsletter, where you'll not only get reminded every time I put up a new tutorial, but you'll have access to my subscriber-only tutorials. And that's 100% free. All you do is go to my website. On the sidebar, just enter your email address and you'll get an email right away with access to those tutorials. Once again, thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you guys next time.